There is a cardinal in your yard right now who has been watching you for months. Every morning you step outside. Every afternoon you walk past the feeder. Every time you appear in the space he has claimed as his own. And at some point, something shifted. He stopped flushing when you came outside. He stayed. Most people never notice when it happens, not because they weren't paying attention, because nobody told them what to look for. Subscribe to Bird Sense right now. This is exactly what we uncover every week and what this bird has been calculating every single time you walked past. That is what nobody ever explains. To understand what that shift actually is, you have to understand what he was doing every time you appeared in his yard. Fear in a bird is not an emotion the way it is in a human. It is not something a bird feels and then decides what to do about. It is a system, a continuous, automated, physiologically expensive system that runs every moment of every day, from the first light of morning until the bird finds a safe roost at night. Every time a cardinal is in a state of active fear response, elevated heart rate, stress hormones circulating, muscles primed for immediate flight, it is spending energy it needs for everything else, for finding food, for maintaining its feathers, for surviving the night. Fear is not free. It costs something real every single time it runs, which means that every time a bird reduces its fear response to a specific element of its environment, including you, it is making a real biological investment, a genuine recalibration of its threat model based on accumulated evidence that this particular thing in this particular space does not require maximum vigilance. And the cardinal at your feeder has already been doing this to you. That recalibration is what you have been witnessing without knowing it. And it did not happen by accident. The research on how birds reduce fear responses to specific humans is more deliberate than most people realize. Studies on habituation in wild birds have documented a consistent pattern. The first time a bird encounters a human in its territory, it establishes what researchers call a flight initiation distance, the threshold at which it will flush and flee rather than hold its ground. That distance is not random. It is calculated. It represents the bird's best current estimate of how much time it needs to escape a threat of this type. Given its current physical condition, the available escape routes, and the cost of leaving a food source. For an unfamiliar human appearing near a wild cardinal, for the first time, that distance can be substantial, 10 feet, 15 feet, sometimes more. But that distance is not fixed. Research has found that birds, in areas with consistent, non-threatening human presence, systematically reduce their flight initiation distances over time. The cardinal that flushed at 15 feet in April may hold its ground at 6 feet by August, not because the human has changed, but because the bird has accumulated enough evidence to revise its threat estimate downward. But researchers found something they didn't expect. The reduction was not gradual. It happened in steps, long plateaus of no visible change, followed by sudden drops in flight distance that appeared almost overnight, which means the shift you noticed one morning was not the beginning of something. It was the end of a process that had been running invisibly for weeks. You did not do anything dramatic to make that happen. You did something much harder. You were consistent. There is a specific mechanism behind this that most people never hear about, and it matters. Birds do not habituate to humans in general. They habituate to specific humans. A wild bird that has learned to tolerate your presence at close range has not become less cautious about humans broadly. It has made a specific entry in its behavioral file about you, your movement signature, your routine, your acoustic presence, and reclassified that specific combination as non-threatening. This means the relationship you have built with the birds in your yard is not transferable. A stranger who approaches your feeder will trigger a completely different response than you do, even if they move and behave in an identical way. The birds know the difference. They have always known the difference. Here is the detail that changes everything. What you have built is individual. It belongs specifically to you and to them. And the mechanism that allowed it to be built is something researchers call predictability. Not gentleness, although that matters. Not patience, although that matters too. Predictability, the consistent repetition of a behavioral signature that does not match the profile of a threat. Every morning, you filled the feeder at roughly the same time. You approached from roughly the same direction. You left when you were done, without lingering in ways that feel like surveillance. Over weeks and months, that pattern accumulated in the bird's threat assessment system as evidence, not proof. Birds do not operate on proof, but accumulated evidence that this particular human, in this particular space, has never once resulted in a threat event. And at some point, the evidence crossed a threshold. The moment it crosses that threshold is not visible from the outside. There is no behavioral signal that announces it, but the research gives us a way to identify it in retrospect. The most reliable indicator is what researchers call return time after disturbance. When something frightens a bird and it flushes, a sudden sound, an unexpected movement, how long does it take to return? For birds that have not habituated to a specific human, return times are long. Often they don't come back at all, while that person is still present. For birds that have crossed the threshold, return times drop dramatically. The bird flushes, circles, and comes back, sometimes within seconds, because the threat assessment system has enough prior data on this specific human to conclude that the disturbance was an anomaly, not a pattern, which means the bird outside your window right now may already be showing you this signal, and you have been reading it as coincidence. The cardinal that flushed when you dropped something near the feeder and then came right back while you were still standing there. The house finch that startled when you opened the back door and returned before you finished filling it. Those were not coincidences. Those were the behavioral signatures of habituation of a bird that has decided, based on evidence you provided, that you are not a threat worth prolonged avoidance. There is a subtler version of this that happens even further into the relationship, and it is the one most people describe when they say a bird seems to know them. Research on long-term bird-human relationships documents what happens when habituation progresses past simple toleration into something that functions like individual recognition of a trusted presence. Birds at this stage do not just fail to flush when you appear, they actively orient toward you. They arrive at feeders more reliably when you are the one who filled them. They resume activities more quickly when you are present than when a stranger appears. This is the part that changes what you see every morning. The cardinal is not experiencing this as friendship. The research distinguishes carefully between the behavioral outcomes of habituation and the emotional states we associate with bonded relationships. But the practical reality, a bird that arrives when you come outside, that holds its ground when you approach, that resumes feeding with you still standing there, is real. It is the behavioral output of a threat model that has incorporated months of evidence about a specific person and arrived at a conclusion. You are safe, not because you are kind, although you are, because you were predictable and consistent, and you showed up every morning, and the evidence accumulated until the threshold was crossed. The thing worth sitting with is what this cost the bird. A wild cardinal that reduces its flight initiation distance is making a bet. It is betting that this person who has never caused a threat event will not cause one tomorrow. Getting it wrong means being closer to danger than survival requires. And wild birds do not stay in a world where they can afford to get that wrong very often. And what happened next is the part nobody talks about. The cardinal in your yard made that bet on you. It reviewed the evidence, it ran the numbers, and it decided you were worth the reduced distance. That decision did not come from warmth. It came from data, from the specific, accumulated, unremarkable data of every ordinary morning you showed up and did nothing threatening. That is not nothing. For a 3-year-old animal that has spent every moment of its existence in a state of active threat assessment, choosing to stand still when you walk past the feeder is a real act. It is not love, but it is not nothing. Most people spend years outside and never know this is what has been happening between them and the birds they watch. Now you do. Tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed the exact moment a bird in your yard stopped moving away from you? A day when something felt different, when a cardinal held its ground or came back faster than it used to. I want to hear about it. I read every single one. Subscribe to Bird Sense. And if you want to understand what is still on the threat list, what specific actions might be working against everything you have built, that video is right there waiting for you.